You think you know who would win? The towering Viking, broad as a bear, sweat on his brow, axe gleaming with someone else's blood. He roars like thunder and his boots churn the mud of foreign shores. Around him, a tide of warriors crash forward, shield to shield, hunger in their eyes. These are the sons of the North, raiders, traders, kings of the sea. But wait. Across the field, beneath the rising sun, stands another shadow. A single figure steps forward, calm, silent, cloaked in lacquered armor that glints like obsidian. His katana is still sheathed, his breathing controlled, precise. He is no less deadly, a samurai. Born of a different world, forged in silence, bound to the code of Bushido. What happens when chaos meets discipline? What if the two greatest warrior classes in history met on the battlefield? Viking and samurai. What if they crossed paths? What if the gods of Norse mythology collided with the spirits of the East? Would strength beat precision? Would fury beat finesse? They never met in history, but what if they had? Today we dive into the myth, the speculation, and the sheer thrill of imagining it all. Because somewhere in the minds of warriors past, this question may have burned like fire. If we had met on the battlefield, who would win? The Northmen rose with the sea winds, like a storm sailing slender ships across open oceans, carving their legacy into coastlines from Ireland to Constantinople. They were raiders, yes, but they were also explorers, merchants, and settlers. They reached Iceland, Greenland, and even set foot in Vinland, the land we now call North America. 1,000 years ago, Viking boots touched 4 continents. Their world was vast, but it had limits. Meanwhile, far across the globe, another warrior culture was being born. Not of the North Atlantic, but in the cherry blossom silence of feudal Japan. The samurai didn't rise from chaos like the Vikings. They rose from a collapsing empire. By the 1100s, Japan's once centralized rule gave way to powerful clans. From the ashes of imperial control emerged the Bushi, warriors who fought not for plunder, but for duty. They trained with sword and bow, studied art and literature, and devoted themselves to a code, Bushido, the way of the warrior. It was a path of honor, loyalty, and discipline, and once it began, it lasted nearly 700 years. So could they have met? Chronologically, no. The last Viking raids faded by the 1050s. The samurai began their rise just after. Like ships passing in the night, they belonged to different centuries, and geographically, they lived oceans apart. Vikings in the icy waters of the north, samurai in the island forests of the east. But here's where it gets interesting. Vikings didn't stay home. They pushed east into the rivers of Russia and south into the heart of Byzantium. Some even joined the elite Varangian Guard, bodyguards to the emperor himself. There, Viking steel crossed paths with Persian merchants, Silk Road traders, and Arab scholars. Viking coins have been found in places that they never conquered, because trade carried their mark further than the sword. Now, consider the Mongols. By the 1200s, these warriors thundered west, smashing kingdoms, building empires. They fought the samurai, they traded in the Middle East, and through them, there's a whisper, just a faint one, that the cultural descendants of the Vikings and the samurai might have brushed fingertips. Perhaps a Norse axe traded to a Persian merchant, and then to a Mongol general who fought both east and west. It's not history, but it's a doorway. And that doorway lets us ask, what if? What if a Viking warband, stranded, shipwrecked, or searching, found themselves near the shores of Japan in some alternate timeline? What if a Japanese feudal lord sent his samurai to meet them? The answer lies not in what was, but in what could have been. Now step with me into the fog of speculation, the mist where fact and legend hold hands, where myth becomes possibility. The ground is damp with blood, the wind carries the sound of steel, and two warriors born of different worlds lock eyes across the field. One has come for glory, the other for honor. Only one will leave the battlefield. The sky was the color of ash, heavy and low, like the world itself was watching. A storm had passed the night before, leaving the battlefield slick with black mud and old leaves. Mist clung to the ground in ghostly tendrils, curling around boots, greaves, and bare ankles. And now, silence. Not peace, but the kind of silence that presses on the chest just before a scream. On the western ridge, the Vikings gathered. They were beasts in bronze and iron, cloaks soaked in the sea spray, shields battered, round, and worn like driftwood. The men stood shoulder to shoulder, shoulder to shield, shoulder to fate. They stank of sweat, sea, and smoke. Leather creaked as they shifted. A low growl rumbled among them, not from one throat, but from all, like a thunderhead rolling across the spine of the land. "Shield wall!" someone barked. They moved without question, like war-forged beasts bred for this moment. Helmets lowered, axes raised. Down the eastern slope, the samurai approached. No roar, no fury, just quiet purpose. Their armor clinked like wind chimes as they moved, strips of steel overlapping in crimson, black and deep indigo. Banners rippled behind them, painted with family crests and holy symbols. They walked in unison, bows slung across their backs, spears upright like forest saplings. Their commander, helmeted like a demon with a golden crescent on his brow, raised a fan, a single silent gesture, and they fanned out archers. From the Viking side, there was movement. A lone Viking had let loose a howl and left the ranks of the shield wall. He surged forward, he surged ahead alone, his axe raised high. An arrow silenced him mid-run. 1 second, fury, the next a ragdoll in the mud. The battle had begun. Arrows flew, not in dozens, but in swarms, black dots in the gray sky. The Vikings lifted their shields, wooden roofs against the storm, but the arrows fell like angry rain, finding gaps in the armor, throats, thighs, eyes. Men screamed, bled, died standing. Still the Vikings advanced, not in precision, but in power. Their feet churned the earth. They howled to Odin, to Thor, to the sea. The shield wall moved as one, closer, closer, until the archers were forced to retreat behind their own ranks. Then the clash. It sounded like the world splitting open, steel on steel, flesh on flesh. Then the Vikings struck with the weight of the mountains, massive dame axes raising and falling in lethal arcs. One cleaved straight through a samurai's shoulder, shattering armor, bone, and breath in a single blow. Another Viking swung too slow and found his gut opened by a katana, neat and clean like a butcher. The samurai didn't yell, they didn't chant. They moved like flowing water, sidestepping, countering, slicing. Their blades sang, precision, efficiency, death in 3 steps or fewer. A samurai with a scar over his eye spun low, dodging a heavy swing, and drove his spear clean through the Viking's stomach. The Northman grabbed the shaft with both hands, dragged the man closer, and in his last breath, grinned and let up a laugh as he collapsed. Chaos reigned. Smoke billowed from the rear lines where someone, Viking perhaps, had set the grass ablaze. Horses screamed and fire licked through their ranks. Mud sucked at boots, tipped the tired, and swallowed the dead. Blood sprayed in arcs across shields and faces. A Viking swung his axe in a spinning circle, his beard matted, teeth bared, cutting a path through 3 before falling to a 4th. A samurai archer ducked beneath the swing of an axe, rolled through the mud, loosened an arrow from the ground, pulled back, and shot a warrior square in the throat before he could lift his shield. And the Viking shield wall, it began to carve openings in the samurai lines. One warrior, broad as a bear and twice as loud, deflected a blade with the edge of his shield, then drove his shoulder into a samurai's chest, knocking him flat with the force of a battering ram. The fallen warrior, now laying in the mud, accepted his fate and closed his eyes. The Viking axe was swift, ending it cleanly before he stepped back into the formation to reinforce the loosening wall. The Vikings pressed forward, shields locked, advanced relentless. The samurais were not used to such a tactic, this grinding, brutal cohesion. But they adapted. The wiser among them struck low, slicing the legs and the feet, bringing shield bearers to their knees with precision. Still, even wounded, the Norse fought like cornered wolves, determined to drag as many foe into the grave as possible. The remainder of the shield wall held, battered but functioning as it always had, spears thrusting through gaps in the wood, finding joints in the armor and the soft places beneath the lacquered plates. Neither side gave ground. Neither side could. And yet slowly, steadily, something began to shift. Vikings pushed forward with brute power and unwavering stamina. These were not the foes they were used to fighting. These were not terrified monks or soft nobles or proud, overconfident Christian armies. The samurai answered back, unyielding in spirit, unbreakable in will, and in the center of it all, beneath the torn Viking banner and the splintered samurai lance, two figures began to close in on each other. Not drawn by command, but by gravity. The battle had hundreds, but the arena was shrinking. A young Viking warrior, bare-armed, blood-drenched, with a wolf pelt around his shoulders, dragged a sword behind him, its edge chipped, its weight familiar. And opposite him, a lone samurai, armor-clad, eyes-focused, katana still pristine in his grasp. He moved like the wind dodging trees, his movements a blur of instinct and grace. They locked eyes. The noise around them faded. They were both focused. They stood alone now. All around them, warriors still clashed, shouts, undying prayers. But for these two men, the world had gone still. A Viking and a samurai, locked in the final circle of the storm. The Viking breathed like a bull, deep, ragged, pulling the smoke and blood into his lungs like it would make him stronger. His beard was caked with mud, his muscles twitching from the effort of having already survived too long. He was a young man, maybe 20 winters, but already hard as carved stone. His round shield was splintered but still held. His sword, straight and cold like ice, gleamed with purpose. Across from him, the samurai exhaled through his nose, quiet, measured. The polished curve of his shimmered in the gray light, untouched by dirt or failure. His armor bore the scars of battle, gouges and burns, but he moved like it weighed nothing. There was no fear in his eyes, only readiness. They circled, not reckless, calculated, each step measured, waiting for the other to blink. One step, two. The Viking adjusted his stance, heavy on the front foot, sword low. The samurai mirrored him, light on his heels, katana angled up. Every inch between them was electric. Every breath was borrowed time. The Viking moved first. He charged, not wild but direct. And he brought the sword up in a crushing arc, a strike meant to kill a horse or crack a shield. But the samurai was already gone. A slide to the left, a flash of silver. The Viking pivoted in time, barely catching the katana with his shield. Splinters flew. The sound, a quick snap, like a heavy tree branch falling to the earth. The Viking followed with a boot to the midsection. It landed, but the samurai rolled with it, gliding backward like water over stone. They gathered their breath. They strategized their next move. Around them, the battle had faded further, like the tide drawing back, as the two waded closer to destiny. "You fight well," the Viking growled, his voice thick with a Norse accent. The samurai said nothing, just narrowed his eyes. Another exchange, this time faster. The Viking feinted left, brought the sword across from the right. The samurai blocked with the flat of his blade, twisted, aimed and cut through. The Viking dropped his weight, catching the strike on the metal rim of his shield, then elbowed hard towards the samurai's helmet. It grazed, enough to send the helmet sideways. The samurai paused and removed it calmly and dropped it in the mud. He stepped forward now, no more circling. Slash, strike, parry, pivot. The rhythm was relentless, the katana a scalpel, the Viking sword a hammer. One danced, the other stormed. Sparks bloomed like fireflies every time their blades kissed. The Viking landed a cut, a shallow one across the samurai's left arm. Blood welled slow and dark, but the samurai didn't flinch. He answered with precision, a downward strike that sliced clean through the back of the Viking's arm and arched low to carve into the right thigh in one fluid motion. The samurai expected a cry, a stumble, some flicker of pain, but the Viking didn't flinch. Pain was there, yes, but not on his face. Instead, he smiled. "You're fast," he said, breathing deep and sharp, "but I'm still standing." The samurai responded not in gesture, but in words the Northman could not understand. "Your courage is undeniable, but I shall prevail." The final exchange was silent. No war cry, no yell, just movement. The Viking lunged. Their steel collided with such force that the katana snapped in the center, the broken half spinning away and landing in the dirt with a soft thud. The samurai stepped inside, releasing the shattered blade. They were too close now for any long weapon to serve them. For a heartbeat, they stood chest to chest. Then, a reversal. The samurai twisted behind his opponent, drawing his wakizashi in a single fluid motion. A razor-sharp blade cut across the Viking's side, not deep, but decisive. By the time the Viking turned, he could already feel his strength draining. He staggered, dropped to one knee. The mud welcomed him like an old friend. The samurai stepped back, silent, waiting, respectful. The Viking looked up, blood spilling from his side. One hand on the earth, the other still gripping his sword. He leaned on it now, the last pillar of a crumbling tower. The two warriors locked eyes. The Viking gave a nod. The samurai offered a slight bow. And then, in a voice like distant thunder wrapped in reverence, the samurai spoke. "You fought well." The Viking didn't understand the words, but he understood the respect behind them. He smiled, and he fell forward, face to the earth, sword still in hand. The samurai wiped the blood from his blade and returned it to the sheath with a soft click. Behind, the battle itself was dying. The chaos that had once thundered across the field now crackled with embers in the distant clatter of retreat. Smoke swirled low, ghost-like, muffling the roars of the wounded and murmurs of the dying. The Viking and the samurai had become a still point in the storm. Survivors watched from blood-slick grass, eyes wide, unsure what they had witnessed. The clash between east and north had not gone the way the samurai expected. Their swords, elegant, curved, built for speed and slicing, had found their marks again and again, but Viking steel, thicker, broader, made to shatter more than slice, had proved punishing. Where a katana scratched, the Norse axe split. Where the samurai cut, the Norse crushed. In the mud and blood, speed gave way to stamina. The shield wall, once tested, had bent, but never broken. The samurai were not used to the grind of it, the way the wall absorbed attacks like a beast with 1,000 limbs, then lashed back with spear and blade through gaps too small to counter. They had struck low, aimed well, dropped Vikings to one knee, but too often these men died dragging someone with them. For every crack in the line, two more filled it. It wasn't beauty that won the battle. It wasn't even strategy. It was endurance. The Vikings outlasted. They bled, but they did not break. They fell, but they fell forward. And in the end, the samurai line, so precise, so noble, buckled under the weight of attrition and fatigue. The final push came not with a roar, but with a growl. Blades battered, shields cracked, faces unrecognizable, covered in blood and mud. The Norse surged as one, a last brutal press. They struck not as warriors seeking glory, but as men refusing defeat. The samurai, realizing the line had folded, fell back in silence, not panic. Their dead were honored and quiet, their wounded were carried, but the field belonged to the North. Not because they were better, but because they endured what others could not. As the smoke lifted and the sun fought its way through the sky, the survivors walked in the field like men waking from a dream. They looked forward, the center where one Viking still stood, sword buried in the earth beside him, head bowed towards the fallen samurai at his feet. No cheers, no song was sung, only silence and respect. The battle was over, the duel was over, but the debate is not. Because to truly ask who would win, a Viking or a samurai, we have to go deeper than wishful thinking. We need to look at what made each warrior, each army, and what made them dangerous, what made them legendary. Let's start with the Viking arsenal. These men were the product of the North, tough, calloused, and born in a world of hardship. Their weapons reflected that. Brutally efficient, built to last, and made for war on sea and land. Their signature weapon, the Dane axe, a two-handed monster, sometimes over 5 feet long. It was sharp enough to split helmets, heavy enough to crush a man through his shield. The axe was not elegant, it was not subtle, it was the full weight of terror in a swing. Many Vikings also carried the Viking sword, broad, double-edged, perfectly weighted for powerful slashes in close quarters. These swords weren't just weapons, they oftentimes were heirlooms, status symbols, passed down, and even named. Then there was the round shield, oak and iron, a little less than a meter across. Vikings used them not just for defense, but as offensive tools, bashing, pushing, pinning enemies. When they fought in the shield walls, it was like facing a living wall of wood and steel. Now picture the samurai standing silent in a temple courtyard, drawing his blade with a movement so fast you didn't even know you were bleeding until you fell. The katana is arguably the most famous sword in history. Slightly curved, razor sharp, forged through a meticulous process that made it deadly and durable. It wasn't just a weapon, it was the soul of the samurai. It could cut through flesh and bone, armor joints, and even arrows mid-flight in the hands of a skilled warrior. But the katana wasn't their only tool. The long spear was just as commonly used, sometimes even more so on battlefields. It allowed reach, speed, and control. Samurais wielded these spears with precision, lunging like striking serpents. Then there was their armor. Vikings wore chainmail, if they could afford it, rings of iron stitched together for flexibility and protection. Many wore leather or padded cloth. Their armor was heavy, but not overly restrictive. Samurai armor was constructed from overlapping plates of lacquered metal, laced together with silk cords. It was both protective and shockingly mobile, designed to absorb arrow impacts and still allow for mounted combat. And let's be honest, it looked pretty awesome and terrifying as well. But weapons and armor are only half the story. What about the mind behind the blade? Vikings trained for war from youth, not in formal schools, but in raids, wrestling, and through hardship. Their strategy was simple: hit hard, hit fast, and keep going. Their real weapon was endurance, fighting for hours, wounded, outnumbered, outgunned, but never backing down. Samurai, by contrast, trained in dojos under masters for years. They practiced sword form, archery, horseback riding, and philosophy. Their combat was a dance of geometry and patience. They trained to kill with one perfect strike and to wait patiently for the moment to deliver it. So who had the edge? In a test of raw strength, the Viking. No contest. His size, power, and brute endurance made him a nightmare in melee combat. In a contest of speed and precision, the samurai. Calm, calculated, devastating in a single movement. In a chaotic battlefield, the Viking shield wall combined with their raiding tactics and experience in sudden ambushes gave them the edge in team combat. But in a controlled duel, on even ground, it's hard to bet against the samurai. Yet this was never just about who would win. It was about how they fought, why they fought, and what their weapons, armor, and training tell us about their worlds and the worlds that shape them. All right, we've seen the weapons, We've felt the weight of the duel and the war of attrition on the battlefield. Now, let's push the thought experiment even further. Let's pit them against each other in 4 different battle scenarios, each testing a different skill set, terrain, or tactic. And you can decide which warrior truly reigns supreme. In scenario 1, let's look at one-on-one combat, the classical face-off. In an open field, no allies, no tricks, just one Viking, one samurai, no escape. Here's the truth. The samurai has the edge. With the katana speed and the cutting precision and a lifetime of dojo training, the samurai is designed for duels, especially in a world where one perfect strike ends the fight. Yes, the Viking is stronger. Yes, he can take punishment. But the samurai doesn't need to trade blows. He just needs one opening, and that's how they trained. Kill with a single cut. My verdict? Samurai wins. Scenario number 2, the large-scale battlefield. 100 Vikings versus 100 samurai, both in formation. In this world, the Vikings shine. They fought as units, shield walls locked together, protecting their own, crashing into enemies like waves hitting cliffs. And they'd been through it all. Ambushes, siege, assaults, river raids. Chaos wasn't a disadvantage, it was home. The samurai trained in strategy and discipline, but their style favored individual combat or small unit skirmishes, not the savage, swirling mayhem of a Viking raid. The Vikings don't win because they're better fighters. They win because they're better as a team in pure chaos. My verdict? Vikings win. Scenario number 3, mounted combat. Picture open plains, a cavalry charge. Who's leading the charge? Not the Vikings. They weren't known for horsemanship. Their battles were sea-borne and fought on foot. Some elite warriors used horses, but rarely, and never with the skill of a trained cavalryman. But the samurai, they were masters of mounted combat. With bow in hand, they could shoot accurately at full gallop. And once close, they could strike downward with their katana or spear. Their armor was built for this exact style of war and mobility, flexibility, and deadly precision on horseback. In a mounted battle, my verdict, samurai win. Scenario number 4, siege warfare and raids. Now, not open battle, but a raid or a siege. It's night. A Viking longship slips into the shore. Smoke rises from a village. The goal? Hit hard, loot fast, vanish before reinforcements arrive. The Vikings were born for this. They perfected shock and awe tactics. Strike terror, overwhelm quickly, and leave before dawn. Samurai could defend castles brilliantly, but raiding was not their strength. They relied on order and honor, while Vikings thrived in disorder. My verdict, Vikings win. So who wins overall? In some matchups, the samurai's precision and discipline shine. In others, the Vikings' grit and chaos reigns. There's no single winner. Instead, what we see is this. Each warrior dominated the world he came from. Each was a master of his own kind of war. And in truth, that's the real answer. They fought in different worlds, with different rules, but the reason we remember them isn't just because they were deadly. It's because they stood for something. You've seen the movies, the TV shows. You can picture their steel. We've seen the battles and the blood, and maybe you've read up on the history of these two warrior classes. We don't remember the Vikings or the samurai just for their blades. We remember them for what they fought for. Let's start with the Vikings. Their world was cold, harsh, and uncertain. A man's life could be snatched by frost or blade at any moment. And yet, they carved a path across the world, not just with war, but with vision, with courage, with the wild belief that there was always something beyond the horizon. They fought for glory, not just in life, but in death. The sagas tell us a man who died in battle went to Valhalla, the great hall of the slain where warriors feasted and fought forever beneath Odin's watchful eye. And so, to a Viking, death wasn't the end, it was a beginning, a test of worth. But glory alone wasn't enough. There was loyalty. Loyalty to one's clan, to one's chieftain, to his brothers at his side. No Viking fought alone. Now, look to the samurai. They lived by the Bushido, the way of the warrior. It wasn't just a code, it was a philosophy. Honor above life, duty above comfort, death before shame. A samurai did not seek glory for himself, but served his lord, his family, and his ancestors. Every cut, every bow, every word was part of a greater harmony. They trained their whole lives not just to fight, but to master themselves. Vikings believed in fate and the idea that a man's destiny was already woven. Samurais believed in discipline, that through control one could shape the future. Two paths, one of chaos, courage, and fire, one of structure, honor, and precision, and yet both led to greatness. Even today, you see echoes of them in military strategy, in martial arts, in films and stories. In quiet moments of resolve when someone says, "I will not back down." Because the Viking and the samurai weren't just warriors. They were symbols of bravery, of sacrifice, of what it means to stand for something bigger than yourself. And maybe, just maybe, that's why they still speak to us. So, did Vikings and samurai ever meet? No. Not in the pages of recorded history. Their worlds were too far apart, their centuries misaligned. But somehow, it feels like they should have. Because they were opposite sides of the same blade. One, born of storm and sea, chasing glory across the known world. The other, forged in ritual and silence, trained to perfect every movement until death itself bowed in respect. One fought with thunder, the other with lightning. And if they had met, if fate had bent its rules and brought them to the same battlefield, there would be no clear victor, just a story worth telling. Because in the end, the Viking and the samurai both did something greater than win battles. They created a legacy that endures. They shaped cultures, inspired legends, and etched their names into the bones of history. Not because they survived, but because they fought for something larger than themselves. And now, centuries later, their spirits still whisper across time, in our stories, in our struggles, in our endless curiosity about what makes a warrior. If these stories stirred something in you, if you felt the fire, the stir to get out there and be brave, if you sense the inspiration of their legacy, would you do me a favor? Leave a rating and a review for the show. Not just for us, not just for me, but for others so they can find these sagas too. Here's something special that I'm gonna do for you. At the end of episode 10, I'm gonna shout out your name. If you've left a review and a comment to tell people what you think about this podcast, I'm gonna shout you out at the end of that episode because you've been with us from the beginning. And that means something. It also means that your name will be etched in digital permanence on the Viking Legacy and Lore podcast, episode 10. I want to thank you for listening. Thank you for walking this path with me. You are appreciated. Until next time, be bold, be strong, and awaken the Viking in you.